My best friend toasted at our wedding. I hope you treat her better than her exes did. Everyone laughed except me. She'd been texting my husband for weeks. I stayed quiet, played sweet. Then I showed her messages to his mother. The wedding ended with one toast and two broken hearts. The crystal champagne glass shattered in my grip the moment Julia finished her toast. Blood mixed with champagne, dripping onto my white dress as the room fell silent. For 3 horrifying seconds, everyone stared, then resumed their chatter pretending nothing happened. Just like they'd been pretending not to notice the growing tension between my maid of honor and my new husband. "Let me help you with that," Julia said, rushing to my side with a napkin, her concerned expression perfectly rehearsed. The same expression she wore when texting Brian at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. "I've got it," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. My wedding day. The pinnacle of dreams I'd sketched in diaries since I was 14, now tainted by 7 words delivered with practiced innocence. "Brian, I hope you treat Michelle better than her exes did." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Because only I knew what those words truly meant. The banquet hall at the Westlake Country Club sparkled with fairy lights and fresh peonies. 200 guests in their finest attire, my mother beaming with pride, Brian's family nodding approvingly. Everything was perfect. The 3-tiered cake, the string quartet, the sunset timing for our first dance. Everything except the knife twisting in my chest every time Julia looked at Brian. "Are you okay?" Brian whispered, taking my bleeding hand. That was quite a grip. His touch still sent electricity through me even now. Even knowing. "Just wedding jitters," I lied, squeezing his hand back. His eyes, those honest brown eyes I fell for 3 years ago, searched mine for the truth. But tonight he wouldn't find it. Tonight I was protecting something fragile. The illusion that this was still the happiest day of my life. I first noticed the texts 2 months ago. A notification lit up Brian's phone while he was in the shower. Nothing explicit. Just Julia asking his opinion on bridesmaid dresses at midnight. Why not ask me? I thought nothing of it initially. Julia had always been overly involved, especially since I named her maid of honor. But then came more messages. Later at night. More personal. More frequent. "You always know exactly what to say," after he'd apparently talked her through a work crisis. "Michelle doesn't appreciate how lucky she is," when he helped her move furniture. "Sometimes I wish I'd met you first," followed by a laughing emoji, that universal shield of plausible deniability. When I confronted Brian 3 weeks before the wedding, he showed me the messages without hesitation. "She's just being Julia," he said. "You know how dramatic she gets. The wedding planning is stressing everyone out." I nodded, pretending to accept his explanation. But that night I created a folder in my phone labeled "Evidence." Not because I planned to use it, but because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. That the growing knot in my stomach whenever they shared an inside joke wasn't paranoia. The wedding proceeded despite my doubts. Too many deposits paid. Too many relatives flying in from across the country. Too much shame in admitting I wasn't sure anymore. "Time for the couple's dance," the DJ announced, pulling me back to the present moment. Brian led me to the dance floor as our song began playing, "At Last" by Etta James. His hand pressed firmly against the small of my back as we swayed. "You look troubled," he murmured into my ear. "Just overwhelmed," I replied, resting my head against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat. Steady. Uncomplicated. Was I making mountains of molehills? Then I saw her watching us. Julia in her maid of honor dress. A shade of burgundy that we'd chosen together over brunch mimosas last fall. Back when I still trusted her implicitly. Her eyes followed our movement with an intensity that chilled me. Not jealousy exactly, something more possessive. As though she was evaluating a purchase she might make later. After our dance, I excused myself to the ladies' room. I needed space to breathe, to think. As I dabbed cold water on my wrists, the bathroom door swung open. "Julia. There's my gorgeous bride," she exclaimed, her words slightly slurred from champagne. "That toast went over well, don't you think?" I met her eyes in the mirror. "What exactly did you mean by it?" She laughed, touching up her lipstick. "Oh, just that Brian's a catch compared to those losers you dated before. Like Ryan? The one you tried to hook up with at my birthday party?" Her hand froze mid-application. For a split second her mask slipped. Ancient history, she recovered quickly. Besides, nothing happened. Not for lack of trying, I thought. Back at the reception, I watched Julia bounce between guests, playing the devoted best friend role. She'd known me since freshman orientation, knew about my parents' difficult divorce, my anxiety struggles, every insecurity I'd ever voiced. And now she was weaponizing that intimacy, inserting herself between me and Brian with surgical precision. The evening progressed with cake cutting, bouquet tossing, all the traditional moments that should have felt magical. Instead, I felt like an actress in someone else's production. Every time I glanced at my phone, I saw the folder labeled evidence. Every time I looked at Brian, I wondered if he was truly oblivious or simply an excellent liar. When Julia approached us for a photo, her arms snaked around Brian's waist. "To the happy couple," she said, her fingers lingering on his jacket. "And to many years of keeping promises." That's when I decided. This wasn't about confrontation or dramatic scenes. This required strategy. Patience. The kind of calculated response that would reveal the truth without making me the villain. As we prepared to leave for the night, Julia hugged me tightly. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion that almost seemed genuine. I hugged her back just as sincerely. "I know exactly what you're doing," I whispered. "And I want you to know, I'm letting you dig your own grave." She pulled back, her smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. "You've had too much champagne," she laughed nervously. I smiled serenely. "Maybe. Or maybe I've finally sobered up." I squeezed her hands gently. "Sleep well tonight, Jules." As Brian and I drove away amid cheers and tossed flower petals, he asked what Julia and I had been whispering about. "Just girl talk," I replied, my head already filling with plans. "Nothing important." The wedding was over. But the game was just beginning. The morning after our wedding, while Brian snored softly beside me, I scrolled through old photos of Julia and me. 8 years of friendship captured in digital memory. Snow angels outside our freshman dorm. Graduation caps tossed high. Her arm around my shoulders at my father's wake. Her eyes red-rimmed but steady while I fell apart. I paused on one image from sophomore year. Both of us in ridiculous 80s costumes for a themed party. Julia's smile wide and genuine as she looked at me, not the camera. That was the Julia I loved. The one who once drove 6 hours when Ryan cheated on me, arriving at 3 a.m. with ice cream and whiskey. "Men are temporary," she'd said, "but we're forever." When did forever start expiring? I traced our friendship timeline backward, searching for the first fracture. It wasn't when she met Brian at my birthday dinner 3 years ago. She'd actually seemed indifferent then, making polite conversation while chatting more animatedly with my other friends. Brian even mentioned afterward, "I don't think your best friend likes me much." The shift began 6 months into our relationship, after Brian moved in with me. Julia started showing up unannounced, something she'd never done before. "I was in the neighborhood," she'd say, though her apartment was across town. She'd bring wine or takeout, insisting Brian join us for roomy bonding. Initially I was thrilled. My boyfriend and best friend getting along seemed like winning the relationship lottery. But then came the subtle changes. Julia started dressing differently when she knew Brian would be around, trading her usual jeans and vintage tees for sundresses and carefully applied makeup. She'd reference inside jokes from our college days, painting herself as the wild one, the desirable one, while casting me as the sensible friend who needed rescuing from her own cautiousness. "Remember that night in Cancun when I had to practically drag Michelle to talk to that cute bartender?" she'd say, laughing while looking directly at Brian. She'd still be standing there waiting for permission if it weren't for me. Brian would chuckle, glancing at me with a newfound curiosity, as if seeing me through Julia's carefully constructed lens. The Christmas before Brian proposed, Julia gave him an expensive watch. Just a little something I saw that screamed Brian, while I received a generic scarf. The subtle message wasn't lost on me. She knew him better, understood his taste more deeply. Then came the engagement. I called Julia first, hands still shaking with excitement. "He finally did it?" she asked, her voice hollow before quickly recovering. "I mean, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you." Later that night, at our celebration dinner, she drank too much and said, "I always knew Brian was marriage material from the moment I introduced you to." "But you didn't introduce us," I corrected her gently. "We met at my birthday." Her eyes flashed briefly. Right, but I encouraged you to date him, remember? When you weren't sure. I hadn't been unsure. And she hadn't encouraged anything. The wedding planning began and Julia appointed herself unofficial co-planner. As maid of honor, it's practically my job, she insisted, though I'd only just asked her to take the role. She created a three-way group chat, her, Brian, and me for wedding decisions. But somehow side conversations sprouted between them. Innocent at first, logistics when I was busy with work. Then opinions about flowers and venues when I was supposedly too stressed to think clearly. During my dress fitting, while my mother wiped away tears, Julia studied my reflection critically. "It's nice," she said, her voice flat. "But is it really you?" That evening I discovered she texted Brian, "Saw the dress today. Gorgeous but maybe too princess. Why? You know Michelle's more understated than that." The comment stung because it contained a kernel of truth. The dress was more elaborate than I'd initially imagined. But the choice had been mine. The doubt now creeping in was hers. The bridesmaid's dress selection became another battlefield. Julia pushed for a style that flattered her figure but looked awkward on my cousins. When I chose something universally flattering instead, she went silent for 3 days, then sent a lengthy text about feeling unheard in the process. 2 months before the wedding, my bachelorette weekend arrived. A trip to a lakeside cabin Julia had organized. She'd invited my college friends and cousins, promising relaxation and fun. The first night, after several drinks, she initiated a game of Never Have I Ever. The questions gradually shifted toward the intimate, thinly veiled attempts to expose my romantic history before Brian. Later, she showed everyone embarrassing photos from our college days, carefully curated to feature me at my worst moments and her at her best. "I'm just giving them the real Michelle," she laughed when I quietly objected. "Brian gets the perfect version. Someone has to keep you humble." The night I found the first suspicious text between them, I was using Brian's phone to order takeout while he showered. A notification from Julia popped up. "Thinking about our conversation earlier. You always know exactly what to say." Something in the wording made my stomach twist. Our conversation? When had they had a private conversation? Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention. Julia would mention having caught up with Brian about wedding details, yet these conversations never seemed to happen when I was present. When I checked our three-way chat, I found gaps, references to decisions I didn't remember discussing. One evening, while Brian slept on the couch, exhausted from overtime, his phone lit up. Another message from Julia. "Sweet dreams, almost husband. Can't believe there's only 3 weeks left until the big day. Almost husband." The presumptive possession in those 2 words crystallized everything I'd been feeling. The next morning, I created a separate email account and began forwarding myself screenshots of their exchanges. Not because I planned to use them, at least not yet, but because gaslighting works by making you doubt your own perception. I needed concrete evidence that I wasn't imagining the subtle invasion happening before my eyes. "Julia's just excited about the wedding," Brian said when I cautiously raised the subject of her increasing involvement. "She wants everything to be perfect for you." But her perfection involved inserting herself between us at every opportunity. And as our wedding day approached, I realized with growing clarity, this wasn't about making me happy. This was about ensuring she remained essential, indispensable, to both of us. The wedding invitations became the final confirmation. When they arrived, Julia texted Brian directly, "Just saw the invitations. Surprised you went with cream instead of white. Thought we'd discussed ivory being the better choice." As if she were the bride. As if this were her dream too. That's when I knew exactly what I needed to do. The bedside lamp cast a soft glow across our honeymoon suite as I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Brian. His breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of exhaustion, one arm still draped across my pillow. For a moment I watched him sleep, this man I'd just vowed to spend my life with, and felt a pang of something between love and uncertainty. I padded silently to the ornate desk by the window, opened my laptop, and logged into the separate email account I'd created weeks ago, truthkeeper22@gmail.com. Melodramatic, perhaps, but it had served its purpose as a vault for the growing collection of evidence. The wedding night should have been different. I should have been curled against him, whispering about our future, not cataloging betrayal. But here I was, sorting through screenshots while still wearing the lingerie I'd carefully selected for this night. I organized the messages chronologically starting from 3 months ago. The earliest ones seemed innocent enough. Brian, could you send me the contact for the florist? Michelle's busy with work stuff. Thanks for handling the deposit. You're so much better with numbers than she is. Little digs disguised as compliments. Subtle undermining that Brian never noticed or challenged. Then the tone shifted about 8 weeks before the wedding. Sometimes I feel like you're the only one who really gets me. Had a rough day. Can we talk later? You always know how to cheer me up. That suit fitting went well. You must look incredible in it. Lucky Michelle. Brian's responses were friendly but not flirtatious. Still, he never redirected her, never mentioned these conversations to me. The secrecy itself was the betrayal. I created a document titled Timeline and began correlating messages with events. A pattern emerged. Julia's texts intensified whenever Brian and I had argued. Somehow she always knew our weak moments, offering him sympathy, understanding, the emotional comfort that should have come from reconciliation with me. Had he been confiding in her? Or was she simply skilled at sensing distance between us? One exchange made my stomach clench. Julia, you seem tense at dinner. Everything okay? Brian, just wedding stress. Michelle's been on edge about her mom's opinions on everything. Julia, you can always vent to me. I'm Switzerland. Brian, thanks. Sometimes I need neutral territory. Julia, I'm always here for you. You know that. I remembered that dinner clearly. An argument with my mother about seating arrangements that had spilled into the car ride home. I'd been upset, yes, but Brian's characterization of me as on edge felt unfair, reductive. And Julia positioning herself as Switzerland, neutral territory, was anything but neutral. The message that hurt most came 5 weeks before our wedding day. You always listen better than she does. 6 words that cut to my deepest insecurity. I'd struggled with active listening since childhood. A diagnosis of mild ADHD in college had explained my tendency to interrupt or lose focus during lengthy conversations. I'd worked hard on it, especially with Brian. To see Julia weaponize this particular vulnerability felt calculated. I clicked print and watched as the printer in the corner of the hotel suite quietly produced page after page. 43 in total. I hadn't realized there were so many until I saw the stack. Working methodically through the night, I used different colored highlighters. Yellow for passive-aggressive comments about me, green for personal compliments to Brian, pink for attempts to create private moments or shared secrets. I annotated each with context, adding sticky notes with my observations. After this message, Brian canceled our dinner plans claiming work emergency. Julia posted Instagram story at same restaurant he ended up at with colleagues. This exchange happened during my bridal shower while Julia claimed bathroom break. By dawn I had a comprehensive dossier. Not the work of a jealous, irrational bride, but a methodical documentation of a pattern. Nothing explicitly romantic or sexual, that would have been easier to confront. This was subtler, more insidious. An emotional intrusion disguised as friendship. I slipped everything into a manila envelope, sealing it with a steady hand. The morning light was beginning to filter through the curtains as I returned to bed, curling against Brian's sleeping form. He stirred slightly, pulling me closer. I closed my eyes but didn't sleep. Later that morning, over room service breakfast, Brian scrolled through wedding photos already appearing on social media. Julia really outdid herself with the planning, he commented, showing me a perfectly captured first dance shot she'd posted. We should get her something special as a thank you. I smiled tightly. Actually, I was thinking about visiting your mom today. She mentioned wanting to have lunch before we leave for the honeymoon. Brian raised an eyebrow. On our first day as husband and wife? Can't it wait? It's important to me, I said softly. You know how much I adore Lydia. And it's just for an hour or so. He shrugged. Sure. I've got some emails to catch up on anyway. Maybe I'll hit the hotel gym. As he showered, I texted Lydia. Would love to see you today. Just us. Something important to discuss. Lunch at your place. Her response came quickly. Of course, darling. 1 p.m. Everything all right? I replied with a heart emoji. No need to alarm her yet. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual. I didn't want to appear desperate or hysterical. This needed to come across as reasoned concern, not jealous paranoia. The The manila envelope fit perfectly into my structured handbag, hidden from Brian's view as I kissed him goodbye. "Give Mom my love," he said, already distracted by his laptop. On the drive to Lydia's suburban home, I rehearsed opening lines in my head, discarding each as too dramatic or too understated. How does one begin such a conversation? "Your son isn't cheating, but..." Lydia had always been perceptive. During our first meeting 3 years ago after Brian had left the room, she'd studied me thoughtfully before saying, "He looks at you differently than the others. Like you're not just passing through his life." We'd formed a bond then, built on mutual appreciation for her son and a shared dry humor. She'd also been the first to comment on Julia's behavior, noticing what I'd initially missed. At our engagement party, she'd pulled me aside. "That friend of yours, she stands too close to Brian. Watches him too carefully." I've seen that look before. I'd dismissed her concern then. Now I was counting on that same instinct. As I pulled into her driveway, I took a deep breath and checked my reflection. Eyes clear, expression composed. No smeared mascara or trembling lip to betray the turmoil beneath. Lydia opened the door before I could knock, enfolding me in a warm embrace that smelled of garden roses and expensive perfume. "My beautiful daughter-in-law," she murmured. "Come in. I've made lunch." I followed her inside, the envelope heavy against my side. Not a bomb to destroy but a shield to protect. Not an end but a beginning. The truth couldn't wait any longer. Lydia's colonial-style home always felt like stepping into a different era. Tasteful antiques, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and photographs spanning generations displayed in silver frames. Today, those same elements felt like silent witnesses to what I was about to reveal. "I made cucumber sandwiches," she said, leading me to the sunroom where a small table was set with her grandmother's china. "And that lemon tea you like." The domesticity of the scene made what I carried feel even more intrusive. I placed my bag beside my chair but didn't immediately reach for the envelope. "Brian told me you're leaving for Belize tomorrow," Lydia said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "The honeymoon suite at that eco-resort looks stunning in the photos." "It does," I agreed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Lydia set down the teapot, her keen eyes studying me. The elegant lines of her face, so similar to Brian's, creased with concern. At 62, she carried herself with the same quiet confidence I'd always admired in her son. "You look tired," she said, reaching across to touch my hand. "Wedding stress." I met her gaze directly. "Not exactly." The words hung between us. Lydia waited, giving me space to continue at my own pace, a trait Brian had inherited from her. "Lydia, I need to show you something," I finally said, reaching for my bag. "And I need you to know that I've thought very carefully about bringing this to you." I removed the manila envelope and placed it on the table between us, my hand resting protectively over it for a moment. "I'm sorry to bring this here," I continued, "but I didn't know who else to show." Curiosity flickered across her face as she accepted the envelope, weighing it in her hands as if gauging its importance by its heft. "This is about Brian?" she asked, not yet opening it. "Yes." "And Julia?" Understanding immediately dawned in her eyes. "Ah," she said softly. "That one." She opened the envelope slowly, methodically removing the contents and arranging them before her like playing cards. The first few pages drew minimal reaction. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a thoughtful pursing of the lips. But as she continued reading, flipping through pages more rapidly, her expression changed. The polite social mask she wore so elegantly slipped, revealing a mother's fierce protectiveness underneath. Her face fell into a long, silent frown as she studied a particularly highlighted exchange. "When did all this start?" she asked quietly. "Months ago," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it. Lydia continued reading, occasionally pausing to reread certain messages. I sipped my tea, watching her absorb the evidence I'd compiled so carefully. The cucumber sandwiches remained untouched between us. "She certainly has a talent for inserting herself," Lydia murmured, more to herself than to me. "Always the supporting character making herself the lead." I nodded, relieved that she saw what I saw. "Brian doesn't see it," I said. "Or doesn't want to." "Men rarely do," she replied, her tone carrying the weight of personal experience. "Especially when flattery is involved." She returned to the documents, examining my timeline with particular interest. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional turning of pages. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted from concern to resolve. "You did the right thing coming here," she said firmly. The validation released something tight in my chest. I hadn't realized how desperately I'd needed someone else to confirm what I'd seen, that I wasn't manufacturing problems or overreacting from wedding nerves. Lydia gathered the papers, tapping them against the table to align them perfectly before returning them to the envelope. Her movements were precise, controlled. A woman accustomed to managing difficult situations with grace. "I've watched Julia for years," she said. "At family gatherings, holidays, dinners. Always hovering near Brian, always finding reasons to touch his arm or whisper in his ear." She shook her head. "I thought perhaps I was being an overprotective mother." "I dismissed your concerns too," I admitted. I trusted her completely. "Trust is your gift," Lydia said. "But sometimes it's also your vulnerability." She rose, moving to a writing desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer she removed a leather-bound address book, turning pages with purpose. "This isn't cheating," she said, finding the page she sought. "But it's close. Too close." "That's what scares me," I replied, feeling the emotion rise in my throat. "It's emotional. And it was never mine to consent to." She nodded, returning to the table with the address book. "Precisely. It's a violation of boundaries that's difficult to name but impossible to ignore." She wrote something on a notepad, a phone number, then tore off the page and tucked it into the envelope. "I've known Julia's mother since our garden club days," she explained. "Caroline has always been mortified by her daughter's intensity with other women's partners. There was an incident years ago with Caroline's bridge partner's husband." She sealed the envelope decisively. "History repeats itself, apparently." I hadn't known this about Julia. The revelation added new context to behaviors I'd normalized for years. "What will you do?" I asked. "Let me handle the rest," Lydia said, her tone brooking no argument. "This requires a certain approach." I didn't ask how. I trusted her. She took my hands in hers, her fingers cool and dry against my skin. "Brian has his father's blind spots," she said softly. "He sees the best in people to a fault. It made Jack vulnerable to those who took advantage of his generosity. I won't let history repeat itself with my son." The mention of Brian's father, dead 5 years now from heart failure, carried significant weight. Lydia rarely spoke of her late husband's weaknesses, preferring to preserve his memory unmarred. "Should I talk to Brian?" I asked. She considered this, then shook her head. "Not yet. Men often become defensive when confronted with their own naivety. Let's approach this differently." She squeezed my hands once more before releasing them. "Go back to the hotel. Act normally. Let him believe your visit with me was nothing more than a newlywed checking in with her mother-in-law." I nodded, standing to leave. A mixture of emotions swirled within me: guilt for what felt like going behind Brian's back, relief at having shared my burden, apprehension about what would come next. Lydia walked me to the door, enveloping me in a warm embrace. "You're stronger than you realize," she whispered. "And you've married into a family that protects its own." As I walked to my car, I felt both lighter and heavier simultaneously. I hadn't screamed in frustration. I hadn't confronted Julia in a dramatic showdown. I hadn't accused Brian of betrayal. I had simply shown the truth and let it do the talking. What happened next would unfold according to its own natural consequences. I had planted the seed. Now I would watch it grow. The 5 days between my visit to Lydia and her casual family brunch passed in a strange limbo. Brian and I returned to our apartment, unpacked wedding gifts, and wrote thank you notes like any normal newlywed couple. We made love, discussed honeymoon plans, and fell asleep in each other's arms, all while I carried the weight of what was coming. Lydia called daily with innocent-sounding updates about the brunch menu or questions about dietary restrictions. But beneath these mundane conversations ran an undercurrent of shared purpose. "Julia confirmed she's coming," she mentioned casually during our Thursday call. "Said she wouldn't miss it for the world." "Of course she wouldn't," I replied, catching Brian's questioning glance from across the room. "Everything okay?" he asked after I hung up. "Just your mom being thorough about Sunday," I said, smiling as I returned to addressing envelopes. Saturday night, I lay awake beside Brian, rehearsing potential scenarios in my mind. Would Julia deny everything? Would Brian defend her? Would I emerge as the villain, the jealous, paranoid wife? The thought made my stomach clench. I'd seen enough reality TV to know how quickly a woman could be labeled crazy for pointing out uncomfortable truths. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Brian hummed in the shower, oblivious to what awaited him. I dressed with particular care. A pale blue sundress that Brian had once said made me look radiant but not trying too hard. My armor for the day ahead. "You're quiet," Brian noted as we drove to his mother's house. "Just tired," I said. "Still catching up from the wedding whirlwind." We arrived 30 minutes early at Lydia's request. She met us at the door in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, pearls at her throat, dressed for battle in her own subtle way. "Brian, darling, would you mind bringing up the extra folding chairs from the basement?" she asked, smoothly separating us. The Miller cousins decided to join last minute. The moment he disappeared downstairs, Lydia pulled me into the kitchen. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I nodded, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Remember," she said, squeezing my hand, "this isn't about punishing anyone. It's about clearing the air so you can truly begin your marriage without this interference." Other family members began arriving. Brian's sister with her husband and children, his uncle Robert, a few cousins. Small talk flowed around me as I helped arrange platters of quiche and fruit. My hands moved automatically while my mind remained fixed on the envelope I'd spotted in Lydia's study, positioned conspicuously on her desk. Julia arrived 45 minutes late. She swept in wearing a fitted red dress that seemed excessive for a family brunch, her makeup flawless, her laugh audible from the entryway. "Sorry I'm late," she called out, air-kissing relatives as she made her way through the living room. Traffic was a nightmare. She embraced Brian warmly, too warmly, before turning to me with a performance of affection. "Mrs. Miller, how's married life treating you?" Before I could answer, Lydia appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. The room quieted instinctively. Lydia had that effect on people. "Julia," she said, her tone polite but lacking its usual warmth. "You're just in time. We're doing toasts again." Julia blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "Toasts?" "Yes," Lydia continued, raising her glass slightly. "To clarity, honesty, and the people who know when to step away." A confused murmur rippled through the gathered family members. Brian glanced between his mother and Julia, sensing something amiss but unable to identify it. Julia laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's specific." "Indeed it is," Lydia replied, setting down her glass. She disappeared briefly into her study, returning with the manila envelope. "You left something behind, Julia." She extended the envelope with elegant precision. Julia took it automatically, her confidence visibly wavering. "What's this?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. "Something you should see," Lydia answered simply. The color drained from Julia's face as she read the label I'd written. Communications between Julia Harris and Brian Miller, January-May 2025. Brian stepped forward, confusion etched across his features. He turned to me. "What's going on?" I met his gaze steadily. "Ask her," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Julia opened the folder with trembling fingers. The room had fallen completely silent, even the children sensing the sudden tension. Her eyes darted across the first page, then widened in recognition. "This isn't what it looks like," she muttered, looking up with panic flashing across her face. "Then why did it feel that way for so long?" I replied quietly. Brian crossed the room, his expression a mixture of concern and growing suspicion. He took the envelope from Julia's unresisting hands, his eyes scanning the highlighted messages. His face darkened as he flipped through page after page of evidence. "When did you?" he began, looking at me, then stopped. "Why would you?" He turned to Julia, unable to complete either question. Julia's composure cracked entirely. "It was just friendly conversation," she insisted, her voice rising. "Michelle is completely overreacting. We were planning her dream wedding." "By telling my husband I don't listen properly?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "By texting him at midnight about how he deserves better?" Brian continued reading, his body language growing more rigid with each page. When he reached the message about being too good for just one girl, he closed the folder abruptly. "I think you should go," he said to Julia, not meeting her eyes. "Brian, this is ridiculous," she pleaded, reaching for his arm. "She's twisting everything. You know me better than that." "Do I?" he asked, finally looking at her directly. "Because I'm not sure I recognize the person who wrote these messages." Tears sprang to Julia's eyes. Whether genuine or tactical, I couldn't tell. "Michelle has always been insecure," she said, glancing around the room for support. "She's turning innocent friendship into something ugly because she's afraid of losing you." I remained silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. The family watched, uncomfortably captivated by the unfolding drama. Brian looked at the folder in his hands, then at me, a question in his eyes. "I found out weeks ago," I said softly. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Understanding dawned on his face. Remembering my quiet withdrawal before the wedding, the moments he'd caught me staring at my phone with troubled eyes. Julia made one final attempt. "This is absurd," she said, laughing shakily. "We're all adults here. Michelle, if you felt threatened, you should have talked to me directly instead of creating this dossier. It's creepy, honestly." "What's creepy?" Lydia interjected coolly. "Is pursuing a relationship with your best friend's husband under the guise of friendship." She turned to the rest of the family. "I think we've all seen enough. Julia, your mother sends her regards. She mentioned something about discussing boundaries when you get home." The reference to her mother visibly deflated Julia. She looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. Brian had moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "Fine," she said, gathering her purse. "Enjoy your little family brunch. Sorry I ruined the perfect facade." As she turned to leave, Lydia raised her champagne glass once more. "A final toast," she announced, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. "To broken illusions, and the strength to walk away from them." The family hesitantly raised their glasses, confusion still evident on many faces. Brian's hand tightened around mine as Julia's heels clicked angrily down the hallway toward the front door. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house. A period at the end of an 8-year sentence. The brunch disintegrated after Julia's departure. Family members made awkward excuses and filtered out, leaving behind half-eaten quiches and uncomfortable glances. Brian's cousins whispered among themselves, casting curious looks our way. His sister embraced me tightly before leaving, whispering, "Call me if you need anything." The unspoken gravity in her voice told me she understood more than most. Lydia busied herself clearing plates, giving Brian and me space. We sat in her garden, a carefully cultivated sanctuary of roses and hydrangeas, neither of us ready to break the silence that had fallen between us. "We should go," Brian finally said, his voice hollow. I nodded, thanked Lydia mechanically, and followed him to the car. The 20-minute drive home stretched for an eternity. Brian gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched white. Twice he started to speak, then stopped. I stared out the window, watching suburban landscapes blur past, feeling simultaneously victorious and devastated. At home, Brian placed Julia's house key on our entry table. She'd had it since we moved in, for emergencies, she'd insisted. The small brass key made a definitive sound against the wooden surface, like a period at the end of a sentence. "I should have seen it," he said finally. Not an apology, not quite, but an acknowledgement. I said nothing, moving to the kitchen to make tea we wouldn't drink. That night, as we lay in bed with a careful distance between us, Brian asked if I wanted to talk. The question hung in the darkness between us. "I don't," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need space." He nodded, respecting the boundary. "Our honeymoon tickets." He began. "Cancel them," I said. "We're not ready." The airline refunded half the cost of our Belize getaway. I used my portion to buy a sleeper sofa for our home office, moving my clothes and essential items there the following day while Brian was at work. Not a permanent relocation, just a necessary distance while we recalibrated. We established an odd routine over the following days. Polite greetings in the morning. Separate meals. Careful coordination of bathroom schedules. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We didn't slam doors or throw accusations. We just let the silence stretch between us, becoming its own language. 3 days after the brunch, Julia texted, "I never meant to come between you two." 7 words carefully crafted to absolve herself while implying I was overreacting. No apology. No acknowledgement of boundaries crossed or trust violated. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. A week into our strange new reality, I came home to find Brian preparing dinner. My favorite pasta dish. A peace offering, not pushing for reconciliation but acknowledging we still occupied the same space, the same life. "Thank you," I said, accepting a plate but taking it to the office rather than joining him at the table. Not punishment but self-protection. I wasn't ready to slip back into normalcy without addressing what had happened. Lydia called every few days, checking in with measured concern. "He's giving you space," she reported. "That's good. He needs to sit with this." "I'm not trying to punish him," I explained, feeling a need to clarify my position. "I just can't pretend it didn't happen." "Of course not," she agreed. "Trust takes time to rebuild. Sometimes it needs to be dismantled completely before you can construct something stronger." On day 10, Brian left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "I miss you. Not just physically. I miss the safety we had. I'm sorry I compromised that." I read it 3 times, tracing his familiar handwriting with my fingertip. The acknowledgement loosened something in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. That evening he knocked on the office door. I invited him in, watching as he took in the space I'd created. My books stacked neatly on the desk, my clothes hanging in the closet, my presence firmly established. "I found a therapist," he said, sitting on the edge of the sofa bed. "Someone who specializes in couples work. Would you consider going? Not because I'm trying to rush things, but because I think we need help navigating this." I studied his face. The familiar lines around his eyes, the sincerity in his expression, the vulnerability he rarely showed. Yes, I agreed, not for him but for myself. I needed to hear myself say out loud what I'd been swallowing for months. I needed a neutral space to articulate the slow erosion of security I'd felt. Our first session was uncomfortable, stilted admissions and careful phrasing. The therapist, Dr. Levine, observed our dance of politeness with knowing eyes. "Michelle," she said toward the end of the hour, "what do you need from Brian that you're not getting?" The question broke something open in me. "Recognition," I said, finally meeting Brian's eyes directly. Recognition that what happened wasn't just friendship gone awry. It was a systematic attempt by someone I trusted to create intimacy with my partner behind my back. And recognition that you participated in it, even if passively. Brian flinched but didn't look away. "I didn't see it," he admitted. "Or maybe I didn't want to." The attention felt good, and I told myself it was harmless because there was nothing physical. "Trust isn't always shattered in affairs," I replied, the words emerging fully formed from some deeper understanding. "Sometimes it dies by degrees, through omissions, secrets, and laughter that excludes." Dr. Levine nodded, letting the weight of the statement settle between us. We continued therapy weekly, gradually moving from separate bedrooms to sharing our space again. Not with the naive trust of before, but with something more conscious, more earned. Julia vanished from our lives completely. She moved across town, then eventually to Chicago for a job opportunity. Information that reached us through mutual friends who gradually stopped mentioning her name around us. I never deleted the email account where I'd stored the evidence. I didn't need to revisit it, but its existence served as a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I had trusted my instincts when they mattered most. 6 months after our wedding, Brian and I finally took our honeymoon, not to Belize as originally planned, but to a coastal cottage in Maine. Simple, private, reflective. We walked beaches collecting sea glass, each piece smoothed by time and friction into something new. "I underestimated you," Brian said one evening as we watched waves crash against rocky shores. "I always saw your kindness as softness. It isn't. It's a different kind of strength." I nodded, accepting the observation. "I've learned that betrayal doesn't always wear red lipstick or come with hotel keys. Sometimes, it raises a toast at your wedding and hopes you never read between the lines." "But you did," he said quietly. "And I rose," I finished, taking his hand in mine. Not the fairy tale beginning I'd imagined, but perhaps something more valuable. A marriage tested early and found resilient. A partnership with clear eyes rather than rose-colored glasses. A love chosen daily rather than assumed eternally. We were building a new foundation. One created with awareness of our weaknesses and respect for our boundaries. One built on things that don't require proof because they're demonstrated consistently through actions, not words. One text message at a time. One therapy session at a time. One truth at a time. Sometimes broken things, when mended with care, become stronger at the fracture points. Sometimes what rises from ashes isn't the same shape as what burned, but it's more fireproof. And sometimes, the loudest statement is the one never spoken. The unanswered text, the friendship ended without dramatic declaration, the quiet dignity of walking away. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lydia hosted that family brunch and handed Julia the manila envelope with all the evidence, saying, "You left something behind." That cold, calculated moment of exposure was absolutely perfect. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.